Hello and welcome to the Sallen coefficient of Watson and Holmes. In the Sallen coefficient, I'm going to take a look at a game's length and its depth and whether or not it all makes sense and how much time it plays in with any randomness that might be an issue with it. Essentially, the coefficient is saying whether or not a game is worth your time if you're into games for their strategic depth. So Watson Holmes really challenges that Sallen coefficient in a lot of ways. It challenges me to reconsider my metric, and in a way, as I discuss here my review of Watson and Holmes, I'm going to also tell you some ways in which I have actually decided to make a few concessions and change the way that I normally look at game reviews to discuss this little game. So Watson and Holmes was published in 2015 by author Jesus Torres Castro, and it was originally published by Ludonova. It's now been picked up by Asmodee, who inexplicably are charging 150% of the price of the game for pretty much the exact same game as far as I can tell. And it has like the same artwork and everything, only I like the artwork here a little better. It kind of showcases more the in-game artwork. Anyway, Watson and Holmes, though, is a game that is about deduction, and it kind of takes the principles of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which is a cooperative game about solving a specific mystery, and it makes that competitive. Every player is going to be making notes on a little piece of paper, which is not included with the game. You're going to have to come up with your own pens, too. You're going to be finding out information by sort of auctioning off little cards, not little cards, they're big cards. They're big-sized cards. You're going to be auctioning off cards to then read the back of them, and as you're reading, you can take notes, and you're going to have specific questions that are posed to you at the start of every scenario. So you'll have a scenario book that looks something like this on the front with beautiful artwork that's not even really focused on in the game, and it'll tell you the difficulty, it'll tell you how to set up the cards, because there is actually some other rules that are going to come effect into the game. You can actually have this read to you, which I kind of struggled with that, but I've just got maybe weak speakers on my iPhone. Anyway, it comes with 13 cases in the box, and you are not going to be able to replay this game once you get done with that, which is kind of the same idea as in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, so the same thing there. The back of it actually outlines your question that you're going to be answering in bold after giving you an explanation filled with like flavor text and just a narrative to get you involved into whatever mystery you are solving. Don't open this, because inside you'll find the solution. So the solution is actually, and I'm just going to flash it really quick here, it is actually a like ending to your story as well. So you begin and end with some prose here that you're going to give you an idea of what you're going to be solving. All the different cards are going to be laid out in whatever arrangement it shows, and players are going to take their pieces and they are going to like bid, and they're going to be using these little tokens to bid. You start out the game with like 10 of them. These actually aren't the tokens, but anyway, they look kind of like these. You're going to be bidding over what card you get to read. You don't actually have to bid. You can do what's called walk on foot. What you're spending is called carriage tokens, and you can walk on foot. And if you walk on foot, then you are not like, you have nothing at stake. But if you spend these carriage tokens, if you bid any of them, you are going to end up, even if you get outbid, taking some sort of a loss. So you're either going to have to pay them all, and that's if you win, which, I mean, in that case, I guess you've got to look at the information you want to see. If you get outbid, though, you still lose one because you wasted time in trying to get there. So these are supposed to represent the time you spend. And each of these cards does represent like a specific location, your mail wagon, your safe. So, and this is from the very first case. As you can see here in the box, because there are 13 cases, you end up with a pretty big stack of these cards. And I would just have to say that I'm very happy with the art direction, with the size of them, but they are pretty flimsy. However, since you only need to use them once, and you're never going to be shuffling them, you're always going to be keeping them in a specific order, at least as far as I know. I have, full disclaimer, only played 5 of the 13 cases here. But I think that it's just very functional, incredibly functional, and in many cases, there's just like really beautiful artwork put to use in this game. Like, this is your Sherlock Holmes card. You can see that sort of stylized cartoon, very just evocative of Sherlock Holmes, you know, holding his pipe. You got your Dr. Watson, and the game is called Watson and Holmes, which in a really interesting sort of send-up focuses more on Watson's writing prowess is as like him being the narrator, more so than it really does on Holmes, there's actually a case or two where you are following Watson entirely, and Sherlock Holmes is only a minor character in that case. So to me, some really cool stylistic choices, both in the artwork and in the narrative. Anyway, though, let's talk about the gameplay, because that's really what I'm here in games, reviewing games, because I love to play games. To me, it's not about theme. It's not about like immersing myself in a particular environment. I think there are better ways to do that than board games. But I'm really being challenged by Watson and Holmes. It is because in Watson and Holmes, and this is the main way that I'm really having to challenge the Sallen coefficient here. And I'm going to talk about theme in this one. There's no way I can discuss my feelings about this game without talking about the theme. And that is specifically because the central principles of it and what I like about Watson and Holmes involve that theme. Watson and Holmes takes a Victorian era England and it makes the historic events, current events of the time period into these almost psychological explorations in its stories. And that's not something that you would expect from a board game at all. Like, this is a narrative. It's such a concise and contained narrative that happens from each of these different cases. And when you think about it, like, there's not that much written about each of these. Like, it's barely even the length of a short story. If you were to compare it with, say, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, quite a famous game, is that in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you've got like this entire book, and it's like lots and lots of text. You got a lot of stuff to go through. And I would say that Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective almost sort of steeps you in its theme. It steeps you because you basically have to sit there and analyze information slowly, and things sink in slowly. At least they do for me, and that's just because of my thick, stubborn, and just thick-headedness, I suppose. But here in Watson and Holmes, things are much more contained. They're much more of just like, it just takes you on this little bit of a thrill ride. I would compare, like, Sherlock Holmes is almost like sitting through a mystery Victorian, mystery dinner theater, whereas Watson and Holmes is kind of more like, it's a much more kind of linear sequence of events, almost like you're going on a bit of a funhouse tour through these elements of Victorian England. But I feel like it still stops you at different intervals in this ride to really give you a much deeper picture of its time period than I would ever expect. And I think the following phrase, what you'll find in this game is, like, you'll find carriages, top hats, things you'd expect, right? You'll find the Whitechapel district. You'll find other elements of historic London. But then along with those, you've got this colonial soldier's guilt. That's an aspect of some of the stories. You've got like the types of medicines and the sort of snake oil peddlers that were rampant in this time. You've got these deep explorations that are central to the cases here. And I've not spoiled anything by saying that. Those are all very much in like the opening descriptions. It is, to me, the biggest selling point of the game that I can say I didn't come for. So I came for the mystery, I came for the deduction, but I'm loving this sort of theme. Maybe I should have ended on that. But anyway, it is really amazing to me. Now let's talk a little bit about the deduction, because I think it almost shares the most in common with a game called Alchemists, a game that required an app or some sort of a non-playing character that was going to essentially do all the book work on figuring out what the different like sort of chemical properties were about different ingredients. And here, the reason I think that that's similar is because in Watson and Holmes, whenever you bid on a card, you never know what's on the other side of that card exactly. You might think like, okay, well, it said in the description that it's all about, somebody robbed a safe. But you never know what you're going to find on the other side of that card. In a lot of ways, like that Forrest Gump line, a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, except here you're having to like auction them off piece by piece. And it's a really bizarre sort of feeling you get when you go to a place that you expected to find nothing and you flip over and you've got a card with tons of text. Or when you go to a spot that you expected to have something and there's nothing there. And so it's, to me, like this element of randomness that I equate to Alchemist, because the central pieces of the puzzle that make up the core of the game are hidden, and they are hidden by design, and there's no way that I can see to fix that. Though I think Alchemist tries to do a little bit more by kind of just adding more and more pieces to it. I think here in Watson and Holmes, it doesn't suffer so much as Alchemist. Alchemist was a much longer game that could be much more upset by some early pointless discoveries. Here in Watson and Holmes, if I find a card that has nothing on it, I'm just one step behind. And the game, like I said, the things I love here don't have anything to do with me winning this game. They don't have anything to do with me like competing in this game. I feel like I described earlier, like I'm really along for the ride here. So there's a really heavy element of output randomness, because you never know what's on the other side of a card. Like, you never know what you're going to discover in Alchemist when you put two pieces together to see what potion they make. And it's frustrating in Alchemist because there's so many other pieces there, and there really is what feels like it should be a capability to excel at the game, but you've just got these situations that arise where you're slapped down by just unlucky discoveries. And later on, chain reaction discoveries can help that. But here in Watson and Holmes, I never feel like I'm that upset, because even if I find a short little bit of things, it still is helping to create this world in a way. So I think the most ingenious thing about this system, and the thing that makes me feel like you can still take it somewhat competitively, is that the central pieces of the mystery, nearly all of the central key bits of information you need to know, are not just contained in one card. And I don't mean like the same information on multiple cards. No, absolutely not. It's almost like multiple paths to deduce the same thing. Like, you can find out about suspicious characters on one card and then figure out about what they were wearing on another card. And in the end, you might figure out that somebody was acting suspicious from one way, but you'll figure out that they were wearing that whoever was wearing this particular article of clothing. So we both find out it was the same guy, but you did it by profiling his clothes. I did it by talking to somebody who was creeped out by him that I found to be a trustworthy a trustworthy source. So to me, that bit of where you've got in multiple places you can find out the same information, to me, takes this and makes it more than just a narrative. Though the narrative is enough to really draw me in here, the element of being able to figure out that same thing, deducing it in different ways, is absolutely ingenious. And Watson and Holmes does that, and it just really blows me away. What goes without saying here is that Watson and Holmes has a very simple structure. I was able to teach this to my non-gaming family members, who, especially those that had like a love for Sherlock Holmes, in very short amounts of time. As in, like, if you didn't have to essentially auction off little spots, auction off a card to see who gets to go first, if you didn't have to do that, then you could pretty much just say, like, we each in turn order decide on a card. And of course, you never know, like, there are certain cards that might just be like immediately fought over. But like, to me, it would almost make it more simple. And the first time that I played it with them, I actually just didn't even make the auctions a part of the game. And whether or not to add them, to me, is, I'm not sure that I really like that I have to auction over different spots. Add to that more gaminess to the system in the form of these little police surveillance tokens. And all these do is prevent people to go and get that information. And since the game, to me, is all about advancing your own little narrative that you're building, one of these in the way, I don't know, like, it does force you to go around it in some ways, but there is at least a few times in the game when I noticed that there were certain sort of bottlenecks of information where you had to either go here or go here, and to get like really important information. And these police surveillance tokens are just so dull. They're banal. They just, all you do is everybody starts out the game with them, of course, because they're, I don't know, because I don't know. They're just like frustrating little things. And when you get done reading a card, you can put this down, and now they have to go to a special location where all you do is get this. Then you throw that away to cancel this. And it's just, to me, it's just it's much ado about nothing, I guess. And I think that, I don't think the game really needs them, and I'm not that big of a fan of them. They're just kind of little obstructions, little roadblocks. Maybe they didn't feel like there was enough game as it was. But what I do really like, and these are fairly simple but really cool, is the way that each person is given a little personality. And these can do things like force all players to to give up their pens and not be able to take notes. They're just kind of like little explorations of a simple system, but I do like the way that they're all written. And I like especially, you can be Toby, and I just remember the Great Mouse Detective in that cartoon. But I really just love the way that each of these helps to recreate those characters from Sherlock Holmes with special variable player powers. And if you don't want to read the variable player powers, you have a special an ability to just get more of the money for auctions at the bottom. So, I mean, they can just be really simple that way. So I'm more a fan of these than I am of some of the other pieces of the actual game structure, but the game structure is what I'm coming for here. I really thoroughly enjoy Watson and Holmes. I'm impressed at how many cases are in this. In many ways, I prefer it to Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective because it really is concentrated. I am maybe too dumb for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective because I get stuck and I feel like the same way that I feel in those frustrating adventure point-and-click games where I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do. In Watson and Holmes, everything is contained on a very digestible amount of cards, and that's what makes me give this one a high rating on the Sallen coefficient. It's really tough for me to even give it a rating at all because of how much I like in this game that has very little to do with it being a game. It's more like a narrative, but that's what I love about Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And I don't know what I would give to that on the Sallen coefficient rating, but I'm going to go out of my way here. And even though this is not a game that I play competitively, the Sallen coefficient on this game is an 8 because it's able to really concisely, in an espresso shot form, give me an amazing narrative that just immerses me into Victorian England. And I think that Dr. Jesus Torres Castro should be commended for what he did as an author as well as a game designer here. And that's the Sallen coefficient of Watson and Holmes.